Serious, people who have come out of comas. What was the most jarring thing you learned to have happened while in a coma? My brother was in a motorcycle accident. He was in a coma for 8 months. He lost a big portion of his brain and one of his eyes, as well as the sight in the one eye. When he woke up he kept asking me to turn the lights on again and again. I'll never forget his face when he realized he was blind. He's lucky to be alive though, so we're thankful, and he's adjusting really well. Holy crap, just thinking about waking up like that gives me a panic attack. My uncle was piloting a single engine plane, crashed, broke many bones, screws, plates, casts, etc. Was in a short coma, woke up not remembering anyone or any history, had to be trained to walk, eat, tie his shoes, years of rehab, was an appliance repairman before the crash, could fix anything. He retained only 2 things: his ability to repair anything and his sarcasm. He's now 81 years old, still a prick. I have to admit, if my dad retained his sarcasm I'd know he'd still be happy at least. My brother was in a coma for about a month and a half. It was a slow process for him to come to again, not like he just woke up and that was it. He had no memories of his 4-year-old son. He knew who he was, but no memories of him being born, his first steps, etc. Not me, but my dad fell down the stairs and got serious head trauma. He was in a coma for a while and eventually came out of it a month or so later. At that point he remembered nothing of the past 40 or so years of his life. He thought my sister was his sister and didn't really know English anymore as he was originally from Finland. Of course he had no idea who I was or my mom was. He didn't live for much longer, unfortunately. I'm so sorry to hear that and hope you're doing well now. Was in a relationship with a girl for a year, and a week before we were supposed to move in together she got into a car accident and was in a coma. 4 days later she woke up but without any memory of the previous 2 years of her life. She eventually remembered bits and pieces of things, but never me. A friend of mine's uncle wrecked his motorcycle, broke 9 ribs and was in a coma for 2 weeks. When he awoke he had to find out his wife passed away suddenly. Was in a coma 15 days, didn't know who wife and kids were, short-term memory was screwed for quite a while. When in the coma I started to come around a few times and attack the nurses. I thought I was being held prisoner in a kitchen, all the equipment in the ICU. I was only out for a few days, but for me the most jarring news was that the car I was a passenger in flipped over my head, was nearly crushed. I woke up and had no memory of it happening. Not me, but a friend. She was in a coma for over a month after a massive car accident, and when she woke up, was told that her parents had died. Due to the brain trauma, she didn't believe it would forget it, so it had to be repeated to her daily. It was heartbreaking. She's doing well now, but still has some lasting injuries, but otherwise lives a very happy, healthy, wonderful life. I think we can all agree that this is a worse nightmare situation. Good to hear that she's better now though. I woke up from a 3-week coma in August 1996 to find out my best friend had died in a major airplane crash the very day I went into a coma. I was in a coma for about 2 weeks and my short-term memory wasn't working when I came out of it. They would give me 3 coins, and I couldn't add them up because I couldn't store the intermediate result. When it sorta kinda started working, I would notice the state of the room. It would change, and I wouldn't remember the change. That means life was dreamlike. Stuff happened that didn't make sense. Plus, my last memory was at college, independent and living on my own. After my coma, I was in the hospital, surrounded by nurses helping me out. A complete environment change. My big day, the day I got a day pass out of the hospital and went to my university. But that was when I went, oh crap, it's not a dream. I will never forget the moment where I thought that. Sounds scary. The loss of memory working really is one scary thing. I mean, we know we've been alive because of our memories. Memory confirms our very existence, so to lose it must be pretty shocking. My father-in-law was in a coma for 8 weeks. When he was recovering, it was sweet to see him fall in love with his wife all over again. I won't find anything happier than this on Reddit at 2 AM. I'm going to bed on this note before something fricks it up. I had a very good friend come out of a meningitis coma on 9/11 about 20 minutes after the first tower went down. His dad was so glued to the TV that he didn't even notice my friend was awake. This homeless girl I befriended told me she was born and raised in Louisiana. When Hurricane Katrina hit, something happened to her and she was in a coma for 2 months. When she woke up, she was told all her family was killed in the storm. That's the worst thing that can happen when you wake up. A co-worker of mine got into an incredibly bad car accident on New Year's Eve. Don't drive drunk, people, and lost her memory of the past 4 months before the accident. The most emotionally distressing thing was that during those 4 months, her and her boyfriend had broken up and had since moved on from each other. When she came to from her coma, it was really upsetting to see the person she was so in love with be with other people. My family was in a car accident when I was 6 months old. My dad was in a coma for 2 weeks. When he eventually woke up, he had to be informed that his infant daughter, me, was paralyzed in the accident and would most likely never walk again. I can't imagine how devastating that news would be. I'm almost glad I don't remember anything from then. Before I met my husband, he'd had an accident, undetermined, in hotel swimming pool. He was in a coma for 3 weeks or so. When he woke up, he had no memory of the accident or being at the hotel, and his body was still swollen from the near drowning experience. His family says he was so waterlogged he looked like Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor. The only thing he remembers from his coma are nightmares, which he says are the scariest he's ever had and defy explanation. He has a minor seizure disorder as a result, and a bit of short-term memory loss. The hardest things for him after coming to were learning to walk again. It took weeks and was extremely painful. Trying to pee, also painful, but mostly just impossible. And finding out that his dad had sold the car he'd been fixing up for 2 years because his dad isn't butthole in general. It was unrelated to the accident. After I had fallen off a scaffold that was 40 feet high, I had a major concussion. I was in a coma for almost 9 years, and when I woke up, it felt like I was out for longer than a night's worth of sleep, but I thought that maybe I was out for a few days. My head was pounding. I was really dizzy and my throat was so dry. I reached up and felt my head, and when there was no bandages or wounds, I got so confused. Apparently I started screaming frantically for the nurse. When the nurses got into the room, I demanded to be taken home, and that's when I found out I was paralyzed from the waist down. Also, my mother, my last remaining relative, died a couple of years before I woke up. I had been basically ward of the state, and the hospice place I was put in wasn't taking care of me very well. I had huge wounds on my back and heels, and I was so frail and thin, I looked like a human skeleton. I was very weak and helpless. My boss had felt bad, and left me money in his will. Yup, he died too. About 3 weeks before I woke up. While I was out, several things in the outside world had happened. The tragedy that was 9/11 happened. Then we caught Saddam and he was executed, and the iPhone was invented. Another shocker was that we had a black president. I knew a guy who was in a coma for about 2 months. It was more of a medicated thing, I guess. I think he's like 70, 75 or so. And, of course, being old, crap happens. And he felt really sick one day, so they brought him to the hospital. One thing led to another. They knocked him out and kept him out for 2 months. And throughout that whole time, his entire body was just shutting down and nothing was working right. Everybody thought he was going to die, but they figured out what was wrong with him, patched him up and sent him on his way. But the thing he said that bothered him the most about it was that one day it was April, and the next day it was June. He woke up one day, and 2 months of his life were just gone. So I guess he didn't really learn anything like some of the other people here. Nobody died. There wasn't a huge disaster or anything. He just learned that he lost 2 months of his life, and that was jarring enough, I guess. Losing 2 months seems bad enough at 20. I can only imagine how much more of a loss that must seem like at 70ish. You know, time is already getting short. I was in a coma for a week from an intentional drug overdose at 14. When I woke up, I found out not only had teachers taken it upon themselves to tell all the students at school that I had attempted suicide, but made all of them sign a card for me. It was really kind of weird to read messages of get well soon from the same girls that had bullied me relentlessly. Rumors, fights, spitting on me, messages on lockers and on bathroom walls, instant messages, Notes: to the point I felt like death was the only when I first awoke, though. I had puked up the charcoal still sitting in my stomach onto my lap. It was a thick black vomit. Then I looked up and saw only the white wall of the hospital. I thought I was dead and had arrived in heck. I was slightly relieved to see I wasn't, but that card peed me off. Although some people really meant their messages, making everyone in my class sign made it a kick in the gut. The same girls then bullied me and called me a psycho that couldn't even die right for cutting and attempting suicide when I returned to school. Jesus. People are fricked in the head. My friend in elementary school was in a coma and woke up suddenly one day. All she would say was that she wanted a horse and all she would talk about was riding a horse. Not sure why that happened. She said at a later date that she'd never been on a horse before. Well anyway, her parents bought her a horse and she started barrel racing and was locally renowned for her skills. I need to drill the phrase "I want to be Batman" into my subconscious in case I ever fall into a coma. 6 years ago my dad was in a coma, after collapsing and having a huge list of things go wrong. Anyway, he's in a coma for 9 months with 3% chance of survival. The hospital had called us to say that we should come and say goodbye as they were going to turn the ventilator and life support off. 5 days after saying goodbye we get a call saying that he was breathing on his own and responding to medication. The drugs he had been given during his coma had made him deaf, so he had to deal with that. One night he called my mum at about 3 AM asking for his motorbike, his leathers and helmet, a toolbox, his iPod, a torch, some rope and his glasses. He told my mum that he was going to break out by climbing down the window and riding home. The nurses heard him shouting to my mum and managed to calm him down, but looking back on it seems quite funny. It's 6 months later and he was home. I came home from school one day and he was in the kitchen. I went in to say hi and tell him I was home and he started pointing a knife at me and telling me to get out of his house. He didn't know who I was and couldn't understand why I was in his kitchen. I called my mum and she came home and sorted it all out. It's been 6 years since and he's one of the most horrible people I know and a nasty alcoholic. I had a friend who was in a partial coma. Not sure of the technical name for his condition, but he was moderately responsive, but obviously out of it and not really in touch with reality. Kinda like someone asleep. He would sort of respond to external stimuli, but it wasn't as if he was aware of what was going on. Anyways, he was a heavy pot smoker, and his father didn't know. Well, while he was in the hospital, he kept doing phantom bong rips in the hospital bed, with his dad present. At first, his dad had no idea what was going on, but once he figured out what the motions meant he was pretty Kid woke up having to explain a few things. If you can consider a week a coma, I found out that my appendix had ruptured. I stopped breathing in the air. My intestines were outside of my body at one point, and the doctor told my parents they didn't think I would live through the night. A week does count and I'm glad you're okay. My mother was in a coma for about 16 days and woke up and found out that the man she was having an affair with had died. She said it helped the coping process. I worked in an army hospital in Germany in the 1970s. During a field exercise, a convoy of jeeps and Gamma Goat, all-terrain vehicles, went through a barrier in fog and ended up going down the side of a mountain. 5 vehicles pancaked each other. The lead driver was the worst off. Head injury, in a coma 3 days. Lots of other banged up troops went to the hospital too. Driver came out of a coma, saw his buddies and freaked out. He was so sure they'd died. He swore he'd seen it happen, so he was certain he had died too and was paying for his sins in heck. I was in a coma for nearly 2 months. When I came to, I didn't know how to read or write, had difficulty talking, had to learn how to eat and drink again, as well as gain strength back to even sit in a chair. It took me a few months to go from being able to sit up to actually walking without a walker. I lack about a year or more worth of memories from my early 20s. I also suffer from mild PTSD due to memories my brain created while in the coma of events in my life that never happened that were horribly traumatic. I have horrible nightmares due to those memories still. I also dreamt of events I saw happen over the next few years after coming out of the coma. I don't know if all of that is common, just my little experience. It's not a fast process, but one of my buds was in a car accident and he was in a coma for a month. When he actually came to, his body appeared the same as the night he crashed. Sweaty, stressed, and hot. I've heard of other similar cases. It's like the brain is all I've got that vital crap in order now to get back to business and then puts itself in the last place it was before turning on all the sensors to get the next update. Must be so disorienting. I was in a medically induced coma for a few weeks in 2004. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the TV. The TV was talking about how the Boston Red Sox had just won the World Series. I am not a fan of baseball, but even I was aware of the curse. Upon seeing this, my first thoughts, welp, that's bulls, so I must be dead. As a Red Sox fan, I would have thought the same exact thing. My story is close to the subject matter. My sister had a massive heart attack at 39. They lost her in the ambulance and had to use the paddles. She responded. However, in the year they lost her again. This time she was given chest compressions. Ended up having a bypass. She's fine. But months later, I asked her what it was like getting CPR. She said that all she remembers is wanting this big guy to stop pushing on her chest. She said she was helpless to do anything but was aware what he was doing. My coma was shorter and my jarring thing less jarring than many in this thread. Obviously it's pretty jarring to wake up seriously injured. But you're there so obviously mostly okay. And you seem to have all your body parts even though they don't all work. Then people start telling you about all the scary things that happened and how the doctors weren't sure you were going to wake up. I was afraid I would die when I went back to sleep. I was really scared to sleep the first night. I woke up after a 9-day medically induced coma on the 28th of December. Christmas music was playing and Coca-Cola Polar Bear commercials were on TV in the hospital. I was full of drugs and disoriented, and had to ask a family member, is today Christmas? Is Christmas the 28th, only to realize that it was the 25th and I'd missed it. I was in a coma for a few weeks. I relate to a lot of what has been said here. I had hyponatremia, an electrolyte disturbance caused by low sodium levels 109. I was in cardiac arrest before I was revived and put into an induced coma. The last thing I remember was feeling incredibly sick and vomiting a lot and generally feeling like I was going to die. My next memory is of needing to pee really badly but not wanting to go because I had to wake up first. I kept trying to wake myself up from the dream so that I could go to the toilet. I then recall a blonde nurse telling me to stop pulling at my tubes, what my name was, where I was, and what happened. I just told her I needed to pee and she said I could pee because I had a catheter in. I felt like it was an elaborate plot to make me pee myself. My short-term memory was gone. I was absolutely convinced I was dreaming. I then requested that everything be taken out immediately. I had tubes in every orifice and several IV lines stitched into my neck and wrist. They were stitched because they had previously tried to bring me out of the coma, but apparently I became incredibly aggressive every time. I kicked a doctor in the head, bit a nurse, slapped my mother, and tried to pull out all of my lines. Apparently this is not that unusual. Bizarre, 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 but the lines came out that day and like one of the other posters the openings became infected in my neck. I also had severe bruising from being restrained after the above incidents. I was moved to a ward after a few days and I remember wandering around the hospital in a dressing gown eating an ice cream cone early in the morning and wondering when this weird dream was going to end. I was completely disoriented. I lost most of my hearing but I didn't realize I'd lost it until weeks later when I was let out and saw my GP and he asked me why I was yelling and I asked him why everyone was whispering. It came back after about 6 weeks. It's about 6 months later and I still feel very disoriented, but less so. I can't really explain it other than to say that I don't feel right. I feel like a ghost. Life has been dreamlike ever since. It has a surreal quality. I'm finding it hard to adjust to civilization. I've been extremely depressed since, have chronic insomnia, and it still hurts every time I breathe and or turn because I tore most of the intercostal muscles in my back during the seizures. I hope things improve. This is kind of unrelated, but how is it being in a coma and then waking up? Is it like sleeping? Or does it have more of the weight? A buddy of mine happened to get hit really hard in a rugby game. He was in a coma for about 4.5 weeks. During his coma the 9/11 bombings happened. His dad worked in one of the buildings and didn't make it out in time. When he woke up we didn't really know what to say. It's still hard for him and most of us to think about it. My dad was put into an induced coma I think. I'm not sure whether it was induced or not. A few months ago upon falling from a pretty big ladder. He's with it now for the most part, but when he just recently came from the coma at the hospital, he couldn't remember me, being his 17-year-old son, or my older sister, but he could remember my 3 other siblings. As he came to, he couldn't be, 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 he's fine now, except from a couple little details. But he's fully functional and remembers everything. He spent 2 months in hospital for the injury. Considerably older, sorry, I'm the youngest by about 7 years. I had brain surgery due to a birth defect, Arnold-Chiari 1 malformation. I know that I went in for surgery on the 11th of July, 1999. That took out part of my brain, removed the back part of my skull and some vertebrae and put my brain in what I call a brain hammock to hold it in place since they were not going to return the back part. I remember a guy nurse who iced my legs for me because I thought that they were on fire while I was in ICU. Guess I had the really good drugs. I remember me yelling at my mom and best friend instructions on where to take the surgery pager. And possibly where to stick it, a pager to notify them when I was out of surgery, because their voices hurt my soul. Kinda like nails on a board. And then I remember waking up in a private room that was not ICU, with the TV on and the sad news of JFK Jr. His wife and sister-in-law had been declared dead after their plane had been found, on the 16th of July, 1999. So there are about 5 days that I do not remember at all. It was a bit of a recovery, learning how to walk and not shuffle, talk and not drool and just remembering things. My mom would show me a picture of me and my friends doing something awesome and I would have no memories of it at all. I had no emotions about the picture other than anger because it was a picture of me, where I could not recall the memory or even the reflection of myself staring back at myself. It was frustrating to say the least. Also, my personality changed. I became darker and according to a few people who I knew before and after the surgery, I also became meaner. I was always a joker and made people laugh, but now I was more sarcastic. I was more of a wallflower before surgery, or at least I was according to my sad journals from junior high and high school. Thank God and Oprah that I kept them. I was a doormat for many people and after the surgery, I guess I grew a pair of balls and I started to curse like an effing sailor. Keeping it clean for this post, and stop allowing people to walk all over me. Years later, though I am luckier than most who have the same surgery, I still have memory loss. That is current thing. Around the same time every year during July as when I had the surgery, I have OCD ADD, which I did not have pre-surgery, and I am completely obsessed with the color red. It has been an interesting journey and I know that I am lucky. Even with the painful headaches that I have still today, I know that I am luck. PS. If I misspelled anything, I had brain surgery, give me a dang break and don't point it out. As someone who has a friend in a coma and a generally pessimistic outlook on things, these stories are so great and uplifting. I know that sounds strange, but they make me stop believing he's a lost case, as some of the people in these stories have been in longer comas than he is right now. Couple of weeks. Thanks so much. Autocorrect fails. In a coma for about a month from a bicycle injury and was only partially functional for another 30 days. Upon waking I found that I had been laid off from my engineering job with an email from my boss stating we do not employ cripples. He got fired and I got a buyout. Not sure what you mean by come out of coma, but I have 2 situations which should answer your question. First, backstory. On the 30th of July 1990 my family was involved in a severe car accident. I suffered a depressed skull fracture resulting in an emergency craniotomy and removal of obviously necrotic brain tissue, of which amounted to roughly 1/3 of my total brain mass. As a precaution I was placed in a medically induced coma which lasted for 6 days. Mind you, I was 5 years old. 1. While in ICU directly following surgery I vividly remember hearing my mother singing a lullaby. Due to other injuries I suffered they had my eyes taped shut. I remember trying to open my eyes to see my mom's face. I was startled when I couldn't. I started to cry because I was scared and had no idea what was happening, and hearing her voice gave me great joy. Remember, this is entirely auditory. I remember hearing a strong male voice tell my mother to stop singing and to leave because it was upsetting me. Hearing her beg to stay by my side was the most painful experience of my life. 2. As a child, death was unbeknownst to me. Also, as an innocent child, I never imagined my parents could lie to me. When I came out of my coma, I had lots of physical therapy and lots of time on my hands. I began to ask questions. First of all, I wanted to know about my dog Sheba. She and I were inseparable and she was in the car with us, so I asked my father where she was. Important. My parents had only recently divorced and my father was already remarried. He told me that Sheba was fine and with my grandfather who was taking care of her. I was thrilled to hear this and went on with it for several weeks. Then late one evening, the doctors allowed my mother to take me outside for the first time. She took me to a very nice part of the patio and broke the news that while all three of us, my mother, brother, and I, survived, Sheba wasn't so lucky. This was the first time I had ever confronted death, and it was the first time I had ever realized my own mortality and how close I came to dying. It still makes me cry when I think back on this. I consider it the day I lost my innocence. Sadly, I have more stories, like finding out that my father tried to block my 8-hour life-saving surgery because he wanted a second opinion while I had brain matter leaking from my ear. TL. DR. There is no TL. DR. This took a lot for me to write about, so please take the time to read this. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.